Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Things Creative. I'm your host, Linda Riesenberg Fisler, and I wanted to talk to you today about my painting process. I just wanted to share some of the things that I share in class while I'm teaching my students, just kind of walk through my painting process with you. In a separate video slash podcast slash blogcast, as I always call them when I'm talking with you on my own, I call them blogcasts versus podcasts. Just a little thing I do. Anyway, I'll share my writing process. And I thought that might be fun since I'm working on the book 4 of the Blind series called that I've decided to call Cloaked now. Um, I thought it might be kind of fun for you to see that whole process. So I'll share some of my free write and how I'm formatting it into a book and all that kind of stuff. But that comes later. I'll also talk about the process of how I'm writing an art instruction book, um, the one that is currently available, but there's some news that I'll be announcing at a later date that I'm really, really happy about. I want to have the opportunity to talk with this person again to make sure that we're really going to do this because we both are so busy, but I think it'd be fun to do this. Um, we're going to write I'm going to write another instruction book, and hopefully I will have a partner in doing that, and I will make that announcement at a later date. I have a very, yeah, let's do this, but I want to talk to him more in depth before I make that announcement. But that's something else that I share a process on how we're doing it, really make you guys a part of that process. So I hope you enjoy this. We're going to get started here. So where do I start? Well, I start with a drawing. And the reason why I start with a drawing is because if you really want to draw somebody in from across the room to look at your painting, there are so many things that go into that. But the number one thing, the thing that is very, very important is you have to have a good drawing, and it has to be correct, and you have to understand, um, you know, that has to be there. I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm just a painter. I can paint this. I can fake this. And over the years, I've really come to understand that no, you can't fake this. Okay, you have to know what you're doing when we start out a painting, and we have to be able to understand some of the key elements of drawing for that to go into there. And interestingly enough, I'm going to start teaching a drawing class, which is something that I never thought that I would be asked to do, but they are asking me to do it, and I will be starting to do paint a drawing class. And I do not put myself anywhere near some of my wonderful artist friends who draw so much better than I do. But anyway, it'll be interesting. It'll be fun. We'll have a good time with it, as always. So I have two pictures here of my starting of these paintings and starting them with drawing. And this first one on the left is of Claire, my grandniece. This is a commissioned painting that my niece commissioned me to do. And this is her sitting on a beach, and she's in her little bathing suit, and she's playing in the water, just on the edge of the surf, just where the little waves have turned over, and she's playing in the water and in the sand there. And so I just want to kind of walk through this a little bit. The first thing I do, if I'm not gridding, which is 1-inch squares, I'll do a rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds, you divide your canvas into basically a tic-tac-toe pattern. So, 2 lines down, 2 lines across. And where those lines intersect are considered focal areas. To get you relatively close to the golden mean and all that conversation. But basically, what I want it to do with this is, the hand catches your eye, you go up this arm to her face, these wisps of light that's hitting her hair and that the wind is blowing, can bring you down. So this is another area that is important. More so, this is the whole area. So this junction here is close to that rule of third area first here that leads us up to this area, which is to me the main focal point of the painting. So if we look at rule of thirds, if I'm doing this, this area here, that is really kind of going to be on that focal point, but I've kind of expanded it to go a little bit larger in there. And as you can note on this, I've made some definite changes. Like I want to talk a little bit about cast shadow. The real thing about cast shadow is a cast shadow you should be able to see through. So when you're thinking about a tree on a landscape and the tree is casting a shadow onto a onto a grassy area, I see a lot of folks painting just a dark value of blue or purple. And so you see a lot of dark blue and purple shadows out there, and you can't see through them. If that tree is casting a shadow onto the grass and the grass is green and maybe it's more yellow green in sunlight, and it's a cooler temperature green in shadow, but I still should be able to, when I look at that shadow, I still should be able to look at it and say, oh, that's grass underneath, in that shadow area, and it attaches to the grass that's in the sunlight area. So it isn't just blue; it's just blue green. It's more green green, if you will, and a darker value, but it's not your darkest dark. Your darkest dark should be a core shadow, which is basically something like this, which is putting her hand down on the sand, and her leg is got a little bit of a core shadow underneath it, and over here on the hand, for example, and that's putting that doesn't receive light. That's down on the shadow. It's not receiving light at all. So that's different than a cast shadow. So I should be able to know and discern that these shadows here are her flesh. So, for example, I would not paint this a dark blue to say that it's shadow, because this is her flesh color. It'll be it'll be a more tannish, beigeish, skin colorish in shadow. And yes, you can argue that Claude Monet painted a lot of flesh color in those blues and purples and all that, but you could still discern that it was a cast shadow. The core shadow may have blue underneath it, just to set it down. And I'm going to show you the finished painting on this towards the end of the process so that I can go over some of that again. But this is a very simple drawing, very simple photograph that was sent to me that from my niece that she absolutely loved and wanted me to capture Claire this way. So that's what I did. And again, this is a cylinder, and we have to, and you'll see in the value study that we have to understand how light affects the cylinder. So light is coming from the right. This would be the lightest value. This would go into tones into, possibly a darker value, but not my darkest dark. And then, the face is in shadow, a little bit of the nose catches a little bit of light. So all of my little drawing notes here, this is very important so that we know that her foot is here. That's a different value than this. Am I going to make a value change here, or am I going to make it a temperature and, a temperature and color change only? Is the shadow, her cast shadow here, going to be the same color as her cast shadow here? We'll see. I'll show you. How can I make this painting more interesting? If you saw the photograph, you would look at it and go, wow, how am I going to make this? How am I going to sell this? How am I going to make people stay interested in this painting? So you can see some little, there's some little notes here that I can follow and make sure, these are the waves. Notice that I don't have any horizon line here, and I was battling that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the value study, and you'll see how I changed it even in the drawing. So this doesn't commit you to absolutely keeping it this way, but it does commit you to this is the way the form looks. And then you can tell I got a little more detailed here on the Santa and the bear, and you guys have seen this probably too many times if you follow me on Facebook. But here is some holly up here in his little reef hat, if you want to call it that. This is his hair, his eyes. So I was a little more detailed on here, even to the point of saying this is a red ribbon. So I told myself this is a red ribbon, and then this is just more of the holly leaves, and this is the teddy bear and the shadowing on the teddy bear, and this side is in shadows. So I'm constantly asking myself, shadow light, what value should this be? I didn't do a lot in value here. I did more in the value study itself, which I don't share with you because you've seen it on Facebook if you follow me. If not, please do follow me on Facebook, friend me, whichever you'd like to do. So now we go on, and from the drawing, I go to the values, and I put this particular painting, the one on the left, in. This is the Hel- the creek in Glen, Helen, and I started this one different. I actually started on the canvas, figured out my rule of thirds, and used a brush because for the longest time, I had a block. I couldn't use a pencil to draw with, and it was really strange. I couldn't figure out why I just could not draw with a pencil. And I came to figure out, well, duh, what do I use to write my books with? Mostly keyboard, but I'm writing note scenes, I'm writing checks, I'm writing, scenes and notes, and everything that I write with a pencil, and that engages, or a pen, and that engages my mind to think more in sentence structure than it does in terms of spheres and cubes, and every time I picked up a brush or every time I picked up a pencil, the first thing that I went to was, oh, I'm going to write something. So I had this block that I had to get over, and then the weird thing is it went all the way into my painting brush with a brush. I had a block and thanks to Carolyn Anderson, we figured out that I was holding my brush like I was holding a pencil. So we changed how I held my brush, and now all of a sudden I'm enjoying painting with my brush again, and I've gotten past the block. So if you find yourself getting into a block, change your hand position on your brush. Change it to a fatter handled brush or a smaller handled brush or something. Have somebody hold the brush out to you so you feel like you're shaking hands with it instead of holding it like an instrument like a pen or a pencil, and see if that helps with your block. This particular one on the left, the painting of Glen Helen's Creek. Glen Helen is a little nature preserve up in Yellow Springs, Ohio, really kind of cute place to kind of hike around in, and there's a little creek that flows through there. And there are Yellow Springs, sulfur springs that come out. So it's really, or iron, I think it's iron. I can't remember. Anyway, there's springs around that, natural springs that are in the reserve. And one of the things that I did here was I just basically took my brush, took four values, put four values from black, darkest dark, to white, lightest light, and mixed a couple in between values. And I started to just sketch this out with a brush. This does not have any undercoat of graphic or charcoal or anything underneath it. I just laid this out with a brush. And while I was doing that, I was thinking about how am I going to handle this painting in the distance, and how am I going to put all these different trees in. And so I was kind of just very freely doing that. And you can tell I used, I was thinking about temperature change. I started in class as kind of a demo, and we got into temperature and color, and I talked about, how this reads as a different value, number one, a different color, number two, but also a different temperature, number three. And this definitely is a different temperature here. And you can see this area here, which is a kind of a blue purple, may not be receiving as much sunlight, but it tells me it's a temperature change. It's still pretty much in the same value. I'm squinting to look. But it may be a quarter of a step darker, definitely darker than this area here, and that wasn't intended to be there. That was just a real quick brush. I only had so long that I could demo with this. So this is probably, at the most, maybe I spent 30 minutes on it as I was going through demoing, and then talking with the students on their work. So again, started with a brush and four values of black and white paint, and created this particular value study, if you will. Very quick drawing. This particular, there are areas that I cleaned up, things that I changed as I got into applying color, and I'm going to walk through my Claude Lily Claude Monet's lily pond painting, about and talk about applying color, and you can see how that really changes. So we'll get to that. So here on the right is Claire. So here was Claire, the drawing stage. Here is Claire in the value stage. And you can see my cast shadow comments here. Okay, so see, you can still see her foot. See how nicely defined this is. See the tone to make her cylinder body feel like it's more 3D. The core shadow area here. This area is a piece of her bathing suit that is kind of a ruffle that is in shadow here, which caused this to be a little bit darker here. This is kind of got a little bit of a darker tone to it, just so that I can tell myself that this is where the strap of the bathing suit comes up. This particular piece of the ruffle of her bathing suit is catching sunlight. Just small little touches. Sorolla did a wonderful painting of that, where he just had one little touch of light on the woman's shoulder who's reading a book out, and then in the background behind her is the beach and some water, and that little piece of light on the shoulder pulls her and sets her. It pulls the background to the foreground. It makes the whole painting one. So, I was kind of thinking of that when I was doing this. It's just really great. And then light on her shoulder here, light on her arm here, light on her hand, the core shadow that sets her hands down on the sand. Shadow here on her leg and her knees. So very, very much fun. And here you can see I said, okay, I'm going to put a quote unquote horizon line here. And as you see, I will show you at the end the finished version of Claire, and you'll see, and I'll walk through making color choices versus value choices, the difference between that. And you'll see where I made those changes, and I'll talk through those a little bit too. So here's Claire's value study, which to me, I would have loved to just keep it like this. I love black and white value studies. I love doing them. It takes the whole confusion about color and values, and it's a very simple painting, and there's beauty and simplicity that I find every time that I do a value study. I find that simplicity just so rewarding. So if you don't do a value study like this, I suggest that you try it out. Excuse me, had to get a little drink of water. So we'll move on. So this is Claude's Lily Pond. And this is in Giverny. And unfortunately, I forgot to take a picture of the black and white gray value study that I did of this, but you can see there is some of that on here. Interestingly enough, I did not have a black tube of paint, so I took Michael Harding's colors and made a very, very dark brown, and this ended up being a very warm tones. This is my darkest dark area, that value that I was using through here as well. This area was also this color, and then so again, you don't have to use like ivory black and put white in it to get or Portland grays or anything like that. You just need a dark color, with your darkest dark, two mid shades, and your lightest light, which always tends to be either the white of the canvas, which is what it is right here, or white out of your tube. However you want to do that. On Claire, back here, this was using ivory blue, so you could tell the difference between these grays, for example, and the warmth of these grays. So finding your grays in your painting is very, very important, and keeping them there is very important too, because it kind of gives the eye an area or a chance to rest. Note this gray here. This gray will stay in the painting. And you can see I started to put in a little bit of reflections here, this area here, and was playing around. This is the sky. Still pretty gray. This guy's still pretty gray. This area I actually started painting with palette knife, and it was had a lot more texture. You can see some of it here. It had a lot more texture in it. It was actually starting to hurt my eye when I started to work on this. It was like too much start and stop, start and stop, start and stop. So I took a brush and I just added some more white to it because it was the wrong value. I wanted to push it back. So I pushed it back by making it lighter, and then I fanned out all of the and blended out all of these extra, little globs of color that I had down there. The eye tends to start and stop at every hard edge, so you have to be really, really careful with color that you aren't causing the eye to start and stop too much, because if the eye starts and stops too much, the viewer gets tired and they walk away. So you want to find some soft edges, and you want, that softness allows the eye to travel through it. Calm areas allow the eye to stop and enjoy the things that are around it. So I pushed these little mountains back by making them lighter in value, and the sky, it's just slightly, maybe a half step in difference in values. But as I worked on that, that ended up being light as well. And you can see some of the green that is reflecting in there if you look close enough. There's a close up of that we'll show later, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this was basically the second part of the process. I get finished with the value study, I start to add color, and this is the area where we're starting to add color. And you can see where I've put in some of the sky colors that I want it to pull through. Those may or may not stay there. I tend to put in a lot more, and then I end up taking them out, and then I may end up putting them back in. It depends on how I feel. You see a little step area here and the little path, and then that kind of disappears off. It's kind of here, but I really didn't want to put this path there. It wasn't important, so I just wanted to simplify that into this nice green color there. So let's go to the next painting. So now I've added some of the shaded area of the willow tree here. I basically refined a little bit of the choppiness that was in the sky, kind of just blended that out a little bit, played with some different colors here, put in the base colors of the lily pads. This guy's still hanging around here. This, I'm telling myself, this is where it's the wrong color, and I agree. But this is where I want the tree to be. Note the tree trunk. It's going to change a little bit too. Look at these guys. We got some close-ups here that we can actually talk a little bit more about. Here's that area back here, and if you look at this little area cut out, maybe we really don't need this there, but this is actually starting to make a kind of interesting little picture on its own, little painting of its own. Nice depth here. We got this core darkness of here and here. This is setting it down onto the pond. We've got some lily ponds. You can see this one is a little more detailed, a little bigger. This one's a little grayer and pushed off in the back, meaning that it's further away. And if you come over here, this is the left side of the painting. This is the right side of the painting. You can really see how I started playing with making lily pads. And as you can see, I'm not real interested in painting each individual little circle of each one of those little pads. I'm more interested in that shape and the color that is going on inside it. And as I get to the next picture, you will see that it even looks more defined, because I may have put in some of these darker colors that are setting the lily pads right on the pond. And this area over here, I just love this little area. I just think that's so cool. But that, people may not even focus on that. But in this particular little cutout of the focus, you can really see how I use my palette knife, and I use the tip of my palette knife to blend a number of things. So this particularly has a lot of soft edges to it, except for where this particular dark area is at. So this is the this is the last session that I did some teaching on in the class. You can see just how different this tree trunk looks now. And I'm going to go back and take out some of this. I'm going to replace it with some of this color. I don't like all of that. It's getting a little too texturized, so I'll take a brush and knock it down, and I'll end up putting in some more of this color. You can see this really dark core shadow here that goes off into this mid-tone, into this light area of the tree. The lily pads, look at this area here. Just love this area here. This I'm not that worried about because I have this foreground of irises and flowers that its stalks are going to be sticking up through. This is basically reflecting some of this. Again, I'm not worried about it because what's in the foreground, this is just going to become filler space between the long stalks of these irises that are planted in the foreground. I also wanted to note this nice red color here. This is a little red bush. It's a little too, it's not a fire, it's not a what we call a fire bush here in the Midwest. It's actually it's more purple. I did add some blue into here to get some purple, but there's even more. It needs to be a little more grayed down. It is in sunlight, but it is not this orange red. It's more on a purple side. So while I have this in at the right value, I'm not particularly liking the color, so I'm going to come back and play with that. But I wanted to talk about this because look how it pushes this area back. And look at the nice color complement that you get into this area. That it's really kind of pleasing. So some of this red may stay, but underlying it is going to be some purple. Look how it has pushed back this area here too. It just pushes it back, and now all of a sudden these lily pads feel further away than they did in the previous picture of the painting. Like I said, this particular, I started to play around in this with the tree trunk, and this starts to disappear. Again, this is all going to have some irises, some pink and purple lavender-ish irises that are going to be sitting in the foreground. And all of this is done with palette knife. And there's this dark area here that I want to get back into this area here as well, just to give it a little bit of a break up in that area. And I may take my brush out and play with that. The one thing I like about Michael Harding paints is they stay wet a little bit longer than most paints do, and I can start to blend some things. So you really get a feeling that this tree is the weeping willow tree that Claude Monet has in his gardens, and you can start to feel that weeping willowness of the tree. So this, I'm really pleased with the way this one's coming along. I noticed to you earlier the gray area of the pond, and that just kind of goes back into the background. It's anchoring. It's warm. It's lovely. It's broken in a number of different pieces of gray, but we really don't notice it until someone calls your attention to it, and all of a sudden, it's kind of like, oh yeah, there is that pond there. And I may come back and I may add some of that back in. This particular lily pad bunching has gotten a little bit too big. I think I'm going to maybe break that back a little bit. You can see where the sun has been added in, and I need to get in a little bit more of the sun. I love this area here. All of the grays that are in that area there I just love that area. Love this area. So this is where we are on this particular painting. Now I'm going to go back and talk to you about Claire. So if I go back to the value study, this is what the value study was like, just as a refresher. And then this is what happened with color. It was a very simple photograph of my grandniece. And I sat there and wondered, how can I make this more interesting? And if we follow the eye, as in reading this painting, you come in at her arm, look at the luscious colors. Yes, there is blue, but there is a reason there's blue. There's this blue bathing suit, and that reflected color is bouncing everywhere. Okay, so this makes sense to me because it's bouncing, light is bouncing into her arm color. But you can also see I have this lovely darker tan, reddish, yellowish, orangish color in here as well. Complement of this, some purple as well. If I think about the redness of her flesh, mixing with that blue, I end up with a little bit of purple. So here's some more of that shadow, some more of the shadow, lovely light color here, a touch of just very light on the skin, almost white, but it's almost this color. So you can bounce right on up here. The dark core color here of the blue, the light here. I could have taken this lighter, but I decided not to. I decided to match it the same light as that, and make this a light area that kind of pulls everything together. So you can find this color in a number of places. And then into the halftone of the skin there. And then the core shadow that puts the palm of her hands down onto the sand. Look at the cast shadow here. I can see through this. This is skin tone. So I can see through that shadow, the cast shadow on the sand. Okay, so I can see that tan color. I can see the blue of the reflected light from the bathing suit on there. The core shadow, again, her skin's a little bit red, the blue of the blue light, so you can get that little bit of purple that's in there. If I can explain having that color there, that's one thing of using it. But, just saying, oh, that's shadow, so it's going to be a dark blue, no, doesn't work. So you can see the lovely colors in her shadow area that keep you going up. You can see just a little touch of light on her nose to define her nose in the dark shadow area. Her little cheeks are here, her eye there. The lightness, again, the light color here, that same here, the light shining and here on the shoulder, defining that and yet pulling it into the painting. And then the colors here to define that arm. Her leg is this color, and this color. So it kind of pulls us into this circle of going back and through her body to see all these colors. The shadow, cast shadow, cast shadow, cast shadow, some blue. That was artist license as far as I'm concerned. I liked it, so I kept it. And then we have this beautiful cobalt teal from Michael Harding that I have in the water. Now, if you remember, I had the horizon line somewhere here. And I painted all of this as just regular sand initially, and it looked like she was about ready to fall off a cliff. So I was like, no, that's not going to work. So I decided to do this line of water of a beach wave that has come up and is kind of reaching out towards her, coming towards her, reaching out towards her. And I used the purple and the blues to anchor that water, and the cobalt teal to represent some of the sea foam. You get that little cobaltish teal part, and you see that here on the sand as well. A great complement color to some of the yellows and everything that are going on here. So that is, we went from drawing to value study to painting. The cylinder of her bathing suit, the darkness of that ruffle. There's a ruffle here too. So had fun painting this. As it turns out, my niece absolutely loves it, so that's a good thing too. But this was Claire, and I really liked how this turned out, and the students really loved how it turned out too. Got a lot of lessons off of this one as we were painting and thinking about, how can I make, the journey up her arm to her face, which is typically what you look for in a portrait, is the face and the eyes. How can I make this journey more enjoyable for the eye, but not to the point where it hurts. Look at all the soft edges. Look at all the soft edges that are in here. So things to consider when you're painting. Hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about my painting process. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate that you do. This particular painting here, when it's finished, we have something in store for you. It's a little project in the works that we have going on that I'm going to announce probably about mid-March. And so tune in for that one. I hope that you'll be surprised and you'll be interested in taking part in this little project that I have going on. So let's see. next podcast coming up, we talked earlier this week, George and Gallo. Uh, he's in the middle of post-production, but he knows I want him to come back on the show, and we're going to talk painting and a bunch of things. Stefan Rednicki and Gabriel DeCure, going to try to get them on in mid-March so that we can talk about that, this little project, and also talk about the launch of the audiobook for Blind Influence. And I just booked at the end of March Honore Quarter, who has a lot of I call them prosperity books, motivational books that she has written. She's a bestseller out on Amazon. She is also, goes and speaks at a number of different conferences, motivational conferences, as well as book conferences. She's has a huge following. So the fact that Honore is going to take an hour of her time to talk to me on a podcast about writing and her creative process is an absolute yay, we did it type of thing. So I'm very excited to have Honore on the program. So until next time, hang in there, keep painting. Hope you found the little bit about my painting process interesting. If you want to talk more about it, you know where I am on Facebook. Please like me on Facebook or follow me on Facebook, friend me, whatever. We can talk there. My email is lfisler@lindafisler.com. You can send me a note there, and I'll be happy to answer you. I also teach, so if you have any questions about that, be happy to answer them there too. So everybody have a great weekend and enjoy yourself. Be creative, and we'll talk to you next time.